Gentlemen, let's talk about something a lot of men think about but almost never say out loud. You want to make sure your partner feels real pleasure, real connection, not just performance. Maybe you've tried things that worked before and suddenly they don't land the same way. Maybe you felt unsure whether what you're doing is actually turning her on, or if you're just going through the motions. If that sounds familiar, you're not broken, and you're definitely not alone. This is one of the most common things men quietly wonder about, and almost nobody teaches it properly. Today we're going to talk about it honestly, without gimmicks, without a magic formula, and without pretending there's one universal trick that works on every single woman the same way, because there isn't. And any video that promises you that is selling you something, not teaching you something. Here's the truth that actually matters. Arousal isn't a switch, and it isn't the same for every person. It's shaped by mood, stress, trust, how connected someone feels in the moment, and yes, physical touch. But touch on its own isn't the whole story. If you skip straight to one area of the body without any build-up, you're often skipping the part that actually matters most, emotional presence. If she doesn't feel safe, unhurried, and genuinely wanted, her body often won't respond the way either of you hope, no matter how technically correct the move is. Let's talk about a few common patterns that tend to backfire, not because they're wrong in every situation, but because they're often used as shortcuts instead of what they really are. Jumping straight to oral sex before there's any build-up can feel more like pressure than pleasure if arousal hasn't started yet. Think of it as needing warm-up time, not being a starting move. Touch that's either too light and hesitant or too rough and rushed can break the mood in either direction. Touch that feels present and attentive tends to land better than touch that's just a technique on autopilot. Massage can absolutely help someone relax, but relaxation and arousal aren't the same state of mind. One can lead into the other, but it isn't a substitute for it. And constant dirty talk or teasing can be genuinely fun, but if it's the only thing happening, it can keep things stuck in the head instead of building physical connection. None of this means there's a single fix. What actually tends to help, based on both research on intimacy and what sex therapists commonly recommend, is slowing down, paying attention to your partner as an individual instead of following a script, and treating foreplay as something you build together rather than something you perform. Using more of your body, not just hands, but closeness, breath, presence, rather than isolating one spot right away tends to build a fuller sense of connection. Paying attention to how she's actually responding in real time, and adjusting instead of sticking rigidly to a plan, matters more than any specific move. And here's something most men underestimate completely: simply asking her, in a relaxed, unpressured moment, what actually feels good to her, is one of the most effective things you can do. Not during the moment like a quiz, but as an ongoing, honest conversation between two people who care about each other's experience. There's no substitute for that. No video, no technique, no supplement can replace an honest conversation with the person you're actually with. If you're feeling anxious about intimacy, whether that's because of age, stress, health changes, or just feeling like something's shifted, know that this is incredibly common, and it doesn't mean anything is permanently wrong with you or your relationship. If those changes are persistent and affecting you or your relationship, that's worth an honest conversation with a real doctor. In person, who knows your actual health history, not a video, and not a supplement sold in a comment section. So here's the real takeaway. Stop chasing a universal technique that promises to work on anyone, and start paying closer attention to the one person actually in front of you. Slow down. Stay present. Communicate openly, both in and out of the bedroom. That, far more than any single move, is what actually rebuilds connection and confidence, and it's something available to you at any age. Starting tonight if you choose it. Let's go deeper into something that gets glossed over constantly in this kind of content: the difference between performing intimacy and actually being present for it. A lot of men, especially as they get older or after years in a relationship, start treating physical connection like a checklist to get through correctly rather than an experience they're actually sharing with another person. That shift is subtle, but it's often the real reason things start to feel flat, not some missing technique. When you're mentally running through steps, did I do this long enough? Should I move to that now? Am I doing this right? You're not actually there with your partner. And here's the uncomfortable truth. People can feel that. Not because they're mind readers, but because distraction and disconnection show up in body language, in pacing, in how rushed or mechanical touch feels. Presence isn't a soft, abstract idea. It's something as concrete as slowing your breathing, actually making eye contact, and letting go of the need to perform correctly. This is worth sitting with for a moment, because a huge amount of anxiety men carry into intimacy comes from comparison, comparing themselves to some idealized version of what sex is supposed to look like, often shaped by unrealistic media, or worse, by exactly the kind of confident-sounding one technique that always works content this video is deliberately avoiding. That kind of content creates a strange trap. It convinces men that there's a correct universal formula they're failing to execute, when in reality, every person and every relationship has its own rhythm, preferences, and comfort level that no generic formula can predict. The pressure to get it right according to some imagined standard often creates more disconnection than any specific physical mistake ever could. Letting go of that pressure, and instead treating each moment as something you're discovering together rather than something you're executing, tends to change the entire dynamic. Let's talk honestly about communication, because it's the single most underused tool in this entire topic, and also the one most men are the most uncomfortable with. A lot of men worry that asking their partner directly what feels good, or checking in during intimacy, will ruin the mood or make things feel clinical. In practice, the opposite tends to be true. A simple, relaxed question like, "Does this feel good?" or "Want me to keep doing this?" or "Try something else," asked in a warm, unhurried tone, usually deepens connection rather than breaking it. It signals attentiveness and care, which are exactly the emotional ingredients that tend to build trust and arousal in the first place. Compare that to guessing silently and hoping you're reading the situation correctly. One path involves real information, the other involves assumption. Over time, couples who talk openly about what works and what doesn't, both in the moment and outside of it, tend to report significantly higher satisfaction than couples who rely purely on nonverbal guessing games, according to research from sex therapists and relationship researchers. That's not a technique. That's just honesty applied to an area of life where honesty is often avoided out of embarrassment. It's also worth addressing something that quietly affects a lot of men and rarely gets talked about directly: performance anxiety. Worrying about maintaining an erection, worrying about lasting long enough, worrying about whether your partner is truly enjoying herself. These worries are common, they're normal, and importantly, they're often self-reinforcing. The more a man fixates on monitoring his own performance in the moment, the harder it becomes to actually be present, which paradoxically makes the anxiety worse. If this is something you deal with regularly, that's genuinely worth an honest conversation with a doctor, not because something is broken about you, but because performance anxiety can have real physical components: stress hormones, blood flow, sleep, overall health, that a healthcare provider can actually help with, rather than something a YouTube video or supplement can meaningfully fix. There's no shame in that conversation. Urologists and doctors have these discussions constantly. It is one of the most common reasons men schedule an appointment, even if nobody talks about it at the barbecue. Age is another thing worth addressing directly, because so much of this kind of content implicitly plays on the fear that aging means losing intimacy, when that's simply not accurate. Sexual satisfaction doesn't have an expiration date tied to a specific birthday. What does change with age, for a lot of people, are things like the specific type of stimulation that feels good, the pace that feels comfortable, and how much emotional context matters compared to when someone was younger. Rather than treating that as decline, it can more accurately be understood as change, different, not worse, and absolutely something that can still be deeply satisfying when both partners communicate about what's shifted and adapt together. Some of the most stable, connected couples report their intimacy actually deepening later in relationships, not because of any specific move, but because of the accumulated trust, honesty, and familiarity built over years. One more thing worth naming clearly: outside stressors bleed into intimacy far more than most men give credit for. Work stress, poor sleep, unresolved tension in the relationship, even something as simple as feeling rushed or distracted by a phone nearby, all of these quietly shape how connected two people feel in an intimate moment. Fixing that isn't about a bedroom technique at all. It's about the hours and days leading up to it. A couple that talks honestly during the day, that resolves tension instead of letting it simmer, that prioritizes actual quality time together outside the bedroom, tends to experience a much easier, more natural sense of connection when they are intimate. In other words, a lot of what people search for as foreplay advice is really downstream of the emotional health of the relationship as a whole. So, if there's one closing thought worth taking from all of this, it's this: stop looking for the one universal move, the one supplement, or the one trick that guarantees an outcome, because that promise, however confidently delivered, isn't how people actually work. What reliably helps is slowing down, staying present, communicating honestly both in and out of the bedroom, and treating your partner as the specific individual she is rather than a formula to solve. And if physical or emotional barriers are getting in the way in a persistent way, a real conversation with a real doctor or therapist is worth far more than anything sold in a comment section. That's not a flashy answer, but it's an honest one, and honest tends to actually work.